Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to the opposition's weekly press conference. As the loyal opposition of Trinidad and Tobago, we remain committed to raising the issues that horrify and shock the people of Trinidad and Tobago as it relates to governance in our beloved country. This morning, I have joining me the Honourable Member of Parliament for Tabakit, Ms. Anita Haynes, who would raise issues within her shadow portfolio as it relates to children in the sphere of education and the Children's Authority. And then later on, I will join you in raising some of the critical matters that are affecting the public utility sector of Trinidad and Tobago. So as we welcome you this morning, I hand you over to MP Anita Haynes, who will take you through the spheres of education and the Children's Authority.
Thank you very much, MP Padarath. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. As we join you here this morning at our Sunday press briefing, we are coming on just over a week since the reopening of school. On April 19th, we saw the full reopening of physical learning, and we in the opposition, as well as members of the wider society, have used that time to really assess what the ministry has been doing in the over a year and a half since schools have been closed and virtual learning was in play. So what have we seen? We have seen a Ministry of Education that has totally been derelict of its duty towards the children of Trinidad and Tobago. This is from infrastructural concerns, the simple matter of not having proper policy making as we went into the physical school system. The ministry has taken a hands-off approach because they clearly seem very incapable of dealing with the varied issues facing our education sector right now. In the first instance, the reopening of school, we were met with a public relations tour by the Minister of Education. That tour was done in a way to comfort all of us and tell us all was done. And immediately upon the reopening of school, we had teachers walking out, we had major infrastructural concerns, things that could have been very easily dealt with in the time that school remained closed. But more importantly, we have a major concern about the safety of our students. We're going to look at it from two angles: health concerns with respect to COVID-19, as well as the safety with respect to the school violence that we have seen over the past few weeks. So in the first instance, I've raised it in Parliament, I've raised it at press conferences, raised it in the media. Over and over, we've been telling the Ministry of Education, you have to establish just proper protocols within the school system. You cannot be hands-off, you cannot leave it up to everyone to just get things done. Whatever is in your remit as the executive, you ought to be doing your best to get that done and doing it well to ensure the safety of our students. We have had schools being reopened with no sanitization protocols in place. That is from overall cleanliness of the schools, whether or not it's a major sanitization effort on a bi-weekly basis for schools, as well as things like whether or not the schools are properly resourced with things like cleaning supplies, hand sanitizers, things like that. The ministry had ultimate responsibility for, and they just kind of left it out into the wind. We also have the question of testing protocols, or what happens should a child or a teacher or person in the system test positive for COVID-19. What is the reporting structure? Who are you obligated to tell? What are you, now mind you, very concerned about the privacy of these children and the teachers, etc. But you also have to take into consideration what is your collective responsibility in terms of letting other parents know why a child may be home, or why we may have to suspend classes for some time. These questions remain all unanswered as we continue, and so we've gotten a list over the last week of schools where there have been reports of COVID-19 positive results, and in that list, and having consulted with my colleagues in the House of Representatives, as well as a number of other persons, we know that that list is not a complete list. And so because reporting is voluntary, do we have an adequate representation of the numbers? Now, this is not to create a space for panic or for persons to keep their children away from school, but it is a space that you can make a responsible decision with respect to the safety of your child. And if the ministry is withholding or not collecting the information in an attempt to create a very pretty picture, then we are really going to run into a lot of trouble. You see, we've seen this throughout the pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, with respect to the numbers, we have, as the opposition, raised the issue of testing, accessibility to testing, whether or not we were testing enough, what the data tells us, etc. And they keep telling us they're following the science. But if you are not collecting adequate data, then it cannot be the science that you're following. And so with respect to schools, I'm calling on the Ministry of Health, who in their press conference noted that they've had no communication from the Ministry of Education. But because the Ministry of Education has abandoned its duty to our children, it doesn't mean the Ministry of Health also has to abandon its duty. Let us introduce some proper protocols, whether it be subsidized testing within the school system or accessibility to testing within the school system, so that we can have an accurate idea of what is happening, so that our children, and so that schools can remain open. Because ultimately we do want students in a physical learning space. We would like to see that in a hybrid space where we can incorporate virtual learning. Well, not necessarily virtual learning, but technology within the school system. As you know, the United National Congress has always been a party that has advanced the causes of introducing more technology within our learning spaces. So if we can incorporate that and create a system where if a student has to stay home, they can still be able to access classes, be it virtually via a podcast, something that the ministry can use the lessons that we have learned over the past year and a half, 2 years, use the technology that they ought to have been building, use the infrastructure that ought to be in place, and create a system where our children can learn safely, that physical spaces can remain open, and that we are not, just overthrown with concerns for just basic safety within the school system. And that leads me to what we've seen as well with the school violence within the last few weeks. The social media has been inundated with images, very, very scary images of school violence. The Ministry of Education and the government has opted yet again to form a committee and take the long road, take a very long, slowly painful road with treating with an issue that they always knew existed. And so because it was dormant as schools remain closed, I cannot understand why they would be surprised that similar issues would come up again once school has reopened. In early 2021, Trinidad and Tobago was gripped with a conversation as to what would we do with respect to violence against women, and how are we treating with violence within our society as a whole. In my remit as shadow education, speaking on this issue, I had raised that we ought to take a very careful look at our curriculum. We ought to be introducing things like conflict resolution, anger management, and proper coping skills. I have raised time and time again that the ministry continues to under-resource the student support services, with vacancies remaining unfilled, with budget cuts towards the spaces. They keep insisting that it is enough to do its job, but what we are seeing, the reality of it is that our students are grappling with a lot. These students would have faced the pandemic, they would have faced challenges. We have no idea because, again, absence of data collection, the Ministry of Social Development is too busy looking into who doesn't deserve a food card to understand what is really the social impact of the pandemic and what it means for the mental health of our students. And coming back out into the school system, you're seeing this violence, and now it's being, the decision of the ministry is to criminalize our children. During the week in an interview, I raised that there ought to be targeted interventions with schools where you see repeated instances of school violence, so that you introduce a consultative approach between the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the school principal, so that there is a targeted approach. This cannot be a catch-all sort of thing, because it is not a catch-all problem. And so instead what we have from the Ministry of Education is saying TTPS will go in. TTPS, like many other state institutions, remain under-resourced and remain unable to fulfill the spaces that they ought to be fulfilling, and now you're introducing a new space. And we did not hear that it's coming in, that TTPS will be coming into the schools looking at things like police youth clubs or a rehabilitative approach. How do we get our children? And let us be very clear, despite what we're seeing in the videos and our reactions as a society, these are still children. And are we saying that as a society we would prefer to give up on these children and criminalize them and let them live the rest of their life with this stigma? Or can we find ways, using both the curriculum, using, again, very targeted interventions, can we find ways to ensure that our children can become productive citizens? Because that is what we ought to be thinking about when we think about the education sector. And so the Ministry of Education, once again, has failed in its duty to our children, failed in its duty to be an advocate for our children, because they keep forgetting that it's not simply an administrative space. You ought to be an advocate for the young people of Trinidad and Tobago. And so, again, as MP Padarath raised, we would have seen the consequences of this dereliction of duty in the newspapers today. House of Horrors. What are we seeing? Over the past 7 years, members in the House of Representatives, members in the Senate, members of the United National Congress have raised over and over and over that the Children's Authority has been under-resourced, that the vacancies remain unfilled, that they are unable to do their duty as duty with respect that they have been given with respect to the children and the most vulnerable children in Trinidad and Tobago. And so what do we have now? We have the minister laying a report in Parliament, and then everybody acting very shocked about something that we've all been speaking about for years. If you are not filling vacancies, if in addition to not filling vacancies, the authority itself is unable to meet the needs or meet its mandate, how can you now say that they've been slow to react, that they are unable, or that they've been passive in reacting to children absconding? They are simply incapable of doing it, because every time you see budget cuts, you see money moving around, they are taking investments away from the young people, taking investments away from the children of our country and putting it God knows where. I mean, we've seen now that they are going to allocate, $124 million to looking into the recommendations of the task force. Listen, the priorities of this government is very skewed. They are finding money for all sorts of things, and they are removing targeted investments from the young people of Trinidad and Tobago. And so everything that we are seeing today is are consequences of very deliberate actions taken by this government over the past 7 years. From 2015 to now, you have seen the removal of laptops, the removal of technology in schools. You have seen over and over, you've seen cuts to GATE, you've seen the bursaries being reinvented, you have seen challenges with even receiving awards at the SCA level. So if that does not tell you that there is a total collapse of the sector based on blatant mismanagement and an inability to conceptualize what is needed in terms of investment for a better Trinidad and Tobago in the future, I don't know what will. So as we continue to hold the ministry to account and to provide, again, solutions, when we sit here and we say, find ways to introduce subsidized testing, do proper data collection within the schools, that is not us just criticizing, That is saying, do your job and do it well. There are ways, simple targeted intervention that can get us where we need to be. And so it is the absence of political will, it is the absence of political intellect even, to get these things done. And so, as I close here today, I will say that the Ministry of Education has absolutely failed the children of Trinidad and Tobago. Parents are seeing it, teachers are seeing it, and we in the United National Congress, we urge a course correction, because mistakes that you are making today, our country will pay for in the years to come. We're paying for it today, and we will continue to pay for it in the years to come. So they really need to get their act together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, MP Haynes, who's raised some of the more critical issues that is gracing the front pages of our newspapers this morning. This morning, I also want to deal as a Shadow Minister of Public Utilities with matters that are affecting the public utilities sector. I want to say on the onset that Minister Marvin Gonzalez is presiding over the collapse of the public utilities sector. There is a total mismanagement, chaos, and the minister seems to be completely out of his league. And we in the opposition will demonstrate why we have been right and why we are justified this morning for calling for the removal and firing of Minister Marvin Gonzalez from the portfolio of public utilities. First, I want to deal with the issues that are affecting WASA. And there seems to be more questions than answers at WASA and the issues that is currently surrounding WASA. And this has to do with the appointment, the suspension, and now the extension of the suspension of the acting CEO of WASA, Shirley Shepherd. The first question we must ask ourselves, in light of all that is happening, is how did Mr. Shepherd arrive at being the acting CEO of WASA? Is it true that there is a close relationship between the Minister of Public Utilities and Mr. Shepherd? And what is the nature of that friendship or that closeness that exists between Mr. Shepherd and Mr. Gonzalez? The Minister has several other questions to answer. And this morning, the Minister must be clear, he must be precise, he must be straightforward with the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to ask the Minister if he can confirm that if Mr. Shepherd was suspended because he defied the instructions of WASA's board to publish a complete list of companies owing WASA billions of dollars. The Minister must also tell us whether or not it was he, the Minister, who instructed Mr. Shepherd, the acting CEO of WASA, to remove 2 companies from that list. The Minister must also share with us if he can confirm that the 2 mega companies are 1, an archipelagic island water park, and 2, a water company that produces drinkable water, blue and pristine as can be. The Minister must go on to say, what is the relationship of these 2 companies to the government? Are the owners receiving state contracts under other company names? What is so special about these 2 companies? 1, an archipelagic island water amusement park, the other being providing blue and pristine water, drinkable water. What is so special about these 2 companies to the Minister if they are special? Now, this is happening against the backdrop of government's policy to name and shame persons who are owing the HDC. Anita just told you that we are starting to come out of the pandemic. We are not there just as yet. Many persons in this country remain in a highly vulnerable and volatile position as it relates to their socio-economic conditions. We saw HDC and others saying that they will name and shame the average man and woman in this country who work as market vendors, shop clerks and food vendors. Those are the most vulnerable people in our society who are at the lowest rung in terms of their income. But the government is concerned about naming and shaming those persons who are unable at this time to put bread and butter on their tables, to send their children to school, The leader of the opposition has called for a one-off grant for children for their school uniform. Not a word coming from any minister of government in terms of government policy on this issue. But we are hearing that they will name and shame those who are unable to put a roof over their heads. But the minister, it appears from our information, and we are asking this morning whether or not it was the instruction of the Minister of Public Utilities to remove two mega conglomerates' names from a list that was approved by WASA's board to be published for naming and shaming for owing billions of dollars to WASA. But we are not surprised, because we have always said to you that this government is about big business, financiers, friends, and today this is a matter that is purely scandalous. And the government, the minister, Senator Wade Mark, raised some of these issues, or attempted to raise some of these issues in the Senate. And because of the parliamentary system and the Gestapo approach taken by this government through their henchmen and women inside and outside of the parliament and the Senate, the minister remains mum on this issue that is affecting WASA. The minister must come clean as to whether he has had a direct hand in attempting to remove those two names of those two companies, and what is the relationship between these two companies and the government. Are these two companies receiving state contracts? What is the nature of the relationship between these two companies and the minister, if there is any? And this morning, the situation at WASA is getting worse and worse and worse. We have warned the employees of WASA. First, they will come for you, which they are already putting in train. The second one would be to sell off the assets and use it for the benefit of friends, financiers, and family. We are seeing that happening. And the minister must say whether or not he has had a direct hand in this matter, and whether Sherland Shepherd is a voluntary scapegoat to protect the person who gave him the instruction. Because we advise that Mr. Shepherd is on suspension, but in local parlance, Trinbagonians believe that when you're on suspension, you get paid, you stay home, and then nothing comes out of it. So is it that whoever gave Shepherd that instruction is being protected by Shepherd, knowing nothing will happen to Shepherd? So that is the first matter that we would like to deal with as it relates to WASA in the public utilities sector. I've told you this morning we will make a very clear case for why Marvin Gonzalez must go as the Minister of Public Utilities. Every single state enterprise under his purview is in utter chaos and mismanagement. I then deal with the issues that are affecting TSTT. Over the past few months, we have been raising the matters that are affecting TSTT. We have called for the immediate halting of firings, sales, and transfers of TSTT's assets. And when the Prime Minister announced that a cabinet subcommittee will be set up to determine the value of TSTT and the disposal of TSTT's assets, we reiterated that call for all firings to cease and for all sales and transfers of TSTT's assets to cease. This morning in the Trinidad Guardian, there's an interview contained in the Guardian, and Minister Camille Robinson-Regis has been mandated to chair this cabinet subcommittee that will deal with evaluating the assets of TSTT. But the minister had a very peculiar comment that she made to the Guardian. And the minister has denied this morning that the government and the cabinet has any knowledge of the sale of the properties of TSTT. Advertising on several social media platforms, and this has been sent to me by many persons, and it was cited in the Guardian's story today, that there are several of TSTT's properties that have been put up for sale, and several real estate agencies are engaged in advertising these properties, etc. I want to remind Trinidad and Tobago this morning that while Minister Camille Robinson Regis, the chair of the Cabinet Subcommittee, placed to evaluate the assets of TSTT, denies government's knowledge of the sale of TSTT's assets, it was this very government and this very Minister of Finance, Colm Imbert, and Prime Minister Keith Rowley, and Minister of Public Utilities, who denied in 2018, when the leader of the opposition, the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar, went to the Parliament, when TSTT bought Massey Communications for over $277 million of taxpayers' money. When Mrs. Persad-Bissessar raised this issue and asked in the Parliament whether or not government had sanctioned this, whether or not Cabinet had agreed to this, the Prime Minister, no person less than the Prime Minister, denied any knowledge of the purchase of Massey Communications for over $277 million. Minister Colm Imbert stood in the Parliament answering Mrs. Persad-Bissessar, denying that he, Minister of Finance, had any knowledge of the purchase of Massey Communications. The Minister of Public Utilities also, like Pontius Pilate, washed his hand. They knew nothing about the purchase of Massey Communications. Brothers and sisters, this morning I want to raise with you that Minister Camille Robinson Regis has spoken on behalf of the government and as the chair of the Cabinet Subcommittee to evaluate the assets of TSTT. But there's a line minister called Marvin Gonzalez. TSTT is 51% state-owned. The board that runs and manages the affairs of TSTT are mostly made up of political appointees, meaning that the persons who sit and make the decisions, the financial decisions of what happens to the assets of TSTT, are appointed by the Cabinet of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And who heads the Cabinet of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago? Prime Minister Keith Rowley. Who sits in the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago? Minister Camille Robinson Regis, the chair of the Cabinet Subcommittee. Who is the Minister of Public Utilities, and where does he sit? Does he sit outside of the Cabinet? He sits among them inside of the Cabinet when these decisions, in terms of the appointees to the board of TSTT, are made. I want to say to Trinidad and Tobago this morning that we had a very similar situation occurring in the Parliament on Friday when MP Rudy Indar Singh stood up and asked about MIC and UTT. The Minister of Education, again like Pontius Pilate, washed her hands. She said that the check was given. The minister was then told, but Minister, you are the line minister with responsibility. You are the line minister who picks up the phone and says, why was that memo issued? Why was that decision taken? Why was Cabinet not informed? Why was the ministry not informed about these positions taken by TSTT, UTT, MIC? These Cabinet ministers are refusing to account to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The minister thinks that we are dumb, that we are dotish, that we are deaf, and they are taking us for fools. Brothers and sisters, when we told you and we reminded you that the Prime Minister said the rich must get richer, this morning I want to share with you a document. And this document states that while TSTT is selling off the assets, meaning the properties owned by TSTT, buildings that are fit for purpose, TSTT is leasing from a company called JC Landings to the tune of millions of dollars properties across this country. And when you look at this document that can be found in companies' registry, and I'm asking this morning, how long has this been going on? Whether or not JC Landings is still providing properties to TSTT while TSTT is selling out their own properties, and at what cost to the taxpayer of Trinidad and Tobago. You see, when you look at this document, it provides some very interesting names, and I will encourage members of the public and others to look to see who are the directors of this company. Who are the beneficiaries of these leases that TSTT is leasing properties from? And while this morning, Minister Camille Robinson-Regis is denying that the Cabinet has any knowledge of the sale of the properties of TSTT, these same properties that can be utilized are being sold off, but properties belonging to friends, financiers, and family of the PNM are being leased through TSTT at the tunes of millions and millions of dollars. And therefore this morning, in the black and white, we say to you, we can understand why the Prime Minister has tremendous confidence in his statement when he says that the rich will get richer. I encourage you to go and take a look and see who are the directors of those companies. I now want to turn to the last issue affecting the public utility sector, has to do with TNTech. And a few days ago, the Minister of Public Utilities in the Parliament, he laid the report into the power outage that occurred on February 16, 2022. And I saw yesterday that the Express carried a headline that said, "An act of God," which was something that has been said and repeated by the Minister of Public Utilities himself as it relates to this matter. I want to say both to the Express and all of Trinidad and Tobago, this is not an act of God. It is an act of incompetence. It is not an act of God, it's an act of dereliction of duty. It is not an act of God, it is an act of mismanagement. It is not an act of God, it is an act of laziness. It is not an act of God, it's an act of stupidity. I want to tell Marvin Gonzalez this morning, do not blame God for your shortcomings. The report, as alluded to by the Minister in the Parliament on Friday, deals substantially with sabotage. And the Minister denied in his statement that the report had anything to do with sabotage. But I want to tell Trinidad and Tobago this morning, the report confirms that there was massive sabotage. It exposes the real saboteurs. The real saboteurs of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, while they in government protected their friends, their ministers, and their family. When you can see Minister Colm Imbert purchasing a generator at 4 in the afternoon, while Trinidad and Tobago was plunged in darkness, while babies lay asleep with the elements exposed to them, mosquitoes, while the elderly face the most traumatic of circumstances, while hospitals depended on generators, not knowing when or how long these generators will last or when power will be restored. The government was more interested in looking after the affairs of themselves, their friends, their families, and the ministers themselves. The report, when we look at it, appears to be incomplete, or is a cover-up. And it asks more questions than it has provided answers. But in the black and white, and the government is parroting this and their mouthpieces in several areas of the print and electronic media, is blaming the ODPM, TNTech, SSA, NOFC. I want to ask this morning, who does these agencies fall under? Who does the agency of the ODPM fall under? Who does the agency of TNTech fall under? Who does the SSA fall under? Who does the NOFC fall under? Are these private sector companies? These are all public sector enterprises with a line minister. Why is it on the day of the blackout that an ad hoc cabinet interministerial committee was not established? That is how Prime Minister Kamala Prasad operated when we were faced with our challenges in 2013 as related to our blackout. The Prime Minister in 2013 found herself, together with the Minister of Energy and the Minister of National Security, at a command center, ensuring that power was restored to the people of Trinidad and Tobago in the shortest possible time, and that there would not be a reoccurrence of this matter. Today I want to ask, based on the report, where was the Prime Minister on the day of the blackout? Where was the Minister of Public Utilities on the day of the blackout? Where was the Minister of National Security? Why was there no interministerial ad hoc committee established right away? Who was the Prime Minister and the Minister of National Security, Minister of Public Utilities, taking advice from? Because the report tells us very clearly that there was no crisis commander in charge, that nobody was in charge. That is what is contained in the black and white of the report. So therefore, if there was no authority, there was no commander to take charge of this situation, who was the Prime Minister taking information from? Who was the line minister and the Ministry of Public Utilities taking information from? Is it that they were just running helter-skelter and that is why this country did not have power restored until 15 and 20 hours later for many parts? Brothers and sisters, more importantly, who was the government and ministers taking information and advice from on the day of the blackout? You know, Minister Shamfa Kudjo, in her first budget statement as a minister, told Trinidad and Tobago, we are in charge and you will deal with it. The report tells us nobody was in charge. Nobody was in charge. So Shamfa Kudjo, Keith Rowley, Fitzgerald Haynes, Stuart Young, while you beat your chest loudly in the parliament, we are in charge, in the black and white of your own report, it tells us nobody was in charge. And therefore, if no one was in charge of the situation that occurred on that day as it's contained in the report, somebody has to go. And that person is none other than the Minister of Public Utilities. Because the report also goes on to tell us that in restarting and rebooting the electricity grid, there was no one in Trinidad and Tobago that had the capacity to restore the grid efficiently and on time and in short manner. That is what is contained in the report. We are not making this up. They will come and they will tell you that this is the opposition usual bad talking the government, and we bad talk Trinidad and Tobago, and we bad talk the public utility sector, and we bad talk this, and we bad talk that. But when we are raising critical issues that affect the livelihoods, because millions if not billions of dollars of taxpayers' money was wasted on that day, when businesses were forced to be closed, when criminals were allowed to run rampant throughout the length and breadth of this country, and while we, the vulnerable citizens, were at the mercy of a clueless, inept government who tells us they are in charge, but by their own report, the report says no one was in charge. You hear that, Minister Shamfa Kudjo? You hear that, Prime Minister Keith Rowley? You hear that, Minister Young? No one was in charge. And that is what the report says. The report also says that we continue to be dependent on a 220 voltage from Union to Gandhi substation. We had these challenges in 2014, 2015, and we in the PP government, we were moving to ensure that we were not purely dependent on these substations and that there was going to be a redistribution. When government came in, they shelved those plans and those ideas and those policies to ensure that the redistribution was not solely being done in specific areas of Trinidad and Tobago, but was being done across Trinidad and Tobago. So therefore, if you had a problem in Gandhi Village, it may affect Penal, Bebe, etc., but it will not shut down all of Trinidad and Tobago. The Minister of Public Utilities must tell us why, when they came into government in 2015, they shelved those plans and those policies. Today, the very report that they have commissioned tells them that part of the problem was the dependence on the 220 volt from Union to Gandhi substation. I want to ask, is it true that none of the black start generators were working on that day? Why was government, through TNTech and the Ministry of Public Utilities, not ensuring that these black start generators were working? They waited and they sat on their hands, telling you Trinidad and Tobago they're in charge. And when they were faced with a crisis, only then they found out that the black start generators were not working. This report is an indictment on the government. Despite the shortcomings of the report in terms of not fleshing out and ventilating a lot of the issues, and in terms of cover-ups, because there are clear areas of the report that are just mentioned in empasa, meaning just in passing. The Minister of Public Utilities made a very strange passing comment in the Parliament, and it's there on the Hansard, where he said the challenge came from the Gandhi substation and NGC has to be blamed. And the Minister said it in a vacuum. And we have been asking the opposition whether or not the gas supply to the IPPs, the independent power producers, was interrupted on that day. And it contributed, if not in whole, in part, to what we experienced in terms of a 15 to 20 hour blackout in Trinidad and Tobago. And the Minister continues to hide, he continues to duck, he continues to run. But in every state enterprise that is under his purview, we are seeing a dereliction of duty. Perhaps the Minister is out of his league. He does not have the capacity to run the public utility sector. But WASA is in shambles. TNTech is in shambles. TSTT is in shambles. And the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago has a history of waiting, not even on the 11th hour, but on the 12th hour. In local parlance, we say it's only when something hits the fan that the Prime Minister acts. Prime Minister in every state enterprise under the public utilities sector, there are massive amounts of mismanagement, waste and corruption under your Minister of Public Utilities. And this morning, the opposition reiterates our call for the Minister to go. We have seen a clear pattern. We have made a clear case. The Minister have a lot of questions to answer as it relates to TSTT, TNTech and WASA. And his being the Minister's role in some of these matters, and also the government's lack of information, transparency, and information being placed in the public domain. These questions are not going to go away. We have seen a habit develop in the Parliament, and some of you may say, well, why you all are not raising these in the Parliament? We have filed up to Friday some of these as urgent matters and as questions on notice. But because of the system, because of the Speaker of the House of Representatives determining what is urgent, what is not urgent, some of these questions were not allowed to be raised there. And that is why we've always said to you, we will be your voice whether it's inside or outside of the Parliament, and we are not afraid of any one of them, because we will call them out to account to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and we have documents too. So Minister of public utilities. You owe this country an explanation in all 3 state enterprises. But more importantly, this morning, you have demonstrated once again your inability to properly manage these state enterprises and the resources of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The PNM has once more demonstrated that they are about big business, friends, financiers, and family. And this is not an act of God. It is an act of stupidity, as is evidenced in the report. Because it comes down to that plain stupidity. Something that could have costed this country $500 to maintain and cut the trees has now costed this country billions of dollars. But that is the way of the PNM and how they govern Trinidad and Tobago, constantly looking in the rearview mirror and crashing as they go forward. Thank you. We now entertain questions. Anita?
Yeah, we have some questions coming in. First one from Ms. Haynes. Ms. Haynes, do you think more could be done to address mental health issues in schools by the Ministry of Education? And the second part of that is, do you think that the Ministry of Education is passing the buck to the police by involving community policing in schools to address this issue?
Well, absolutely. On the first instance, with respect to mental health in schools, absolutely. Again, the student support services, guidance counselors, etc. We have seen over time budget cuts. We have reports of vacancies not being filled, spaces just being absent. And whether or not, even with these auxiliary services, in the introduction of certain things into the curriculum, like I said before, conflict resolution, anger management, etc., you would find the space to introduce conversations and treat with mental health as part of an everyday space, as opposed to making it something that is on the outskirts of our conversation. And so yes, absolutely more can be done. More can be done in partnership between the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health. You would recall a couple of years ago the Minister of Health was very vocal on mental health in all spaces, and now we are looking for that introduction within the school system and to really help our students coming out of a pandemic, grappling with the economic challenges, the social challenges, and all of the things that adults face, but they are also facing as children. And for the issue of TTPS, yes, absolutely, the ministry is passing the buck. Not only that, not only are they passing the buck, but they're doing so in a way that really doesn't even keep our children at the forefront. They are trying to find a quick fix, and they're trying to pacify a very and unjustifiably upset public. So by saying, listen, this is how we've dealt with this, we have let the TTPS come in and treat with school violence, it is absolutely passing the buck. And what we needed to see is targeted interventions, proper consultation with the principals and the educators in the schools that are facing the most violence. We needed to see a short-term approach with respect to both mental health in schools, conflict resolution in schools, and as well as how can you assist teachers and other students with coping with the consequences of the violence that has been in the school system, and then moving into a more medium and long-term approaches. And all of that has been absent. As a matter of fact, the Ministry of Education has been absent on this issue altogether.
And with regards to the Children's Authority, this report was submitted to the Minister in December of last year. Given the seriousness of the findings, has there been any explanation as to why it's been almost 5 months before it was brought to Parliament?
Well, there's been no explanation, but as you would see, correct, yeah, as you would see from the press conference today and issues we raised, that is just the way that they operate. They drag their feet, they pass the buck, they blame anybody else. There is no accountability. There is no, I mean, when you hear a line minister saying that the report shows that the authority has been, there are vacancies and they are unable to fulfill their mandate, and knowing that you are ultimately responsible for fixing these problems, it just shows you that they really have no accountability. And so there is no justification for why it has taken so long. But I can also guarantee you that having laid the report, it's going to take many months, if at all, any sort of corrective measures to take place. And as I said in my earlier presentation, these issues have been on the front burner, raised by the opposition for the past several years, so these are not new issues.
MP Padarath, with respect to the naming and shaming, do you think that that strategy would actually work in terms of encouraging people to pay their debts, or what are your thoughts?
Well, we see that government is selective in their policy. So what we are saying this morning is that if government's policy is to name and shame, then you must not be selective. You must be inclusive in that it must reflect all the debtors, all those who are indebted to state enterprises and so on. If it is government's policy to publish a name and shame, then do not be selective. So that is our position as it relates to that. Government policy is government policy, but the major questions that have arisen out of this matter has to do with why. Why has government decided that they will extricate from the list of indebtors that owe millions and billions of dollars specific names of companies, and people who owe $100, $200, a few $1,000s, they're quick to name and shame them. Who are they protecting? Why are they protecting big business? That is the more burning question coming out from government's policy.
With regards to TSTT, do you think these assets should be put on hold until perhaps more transparent, there's more transparency in the sale?
We have called for an immediate halting of the sale or transfer to all of TSTT's assets. From day one, that has been our position. When we were told that government had signaled that there were efforts to wrap up the operations of TSTT, and Amplia had started to take over a lot of TSTT's operations, we called for the immediate halting and the immediate cease of transferring these assets or the sale of these assets. So most definitely, as I said, for the Minister of Planning, who heads the committee, the cabinet subcommittee that has been placed to evaluate the assets of TSTT, it is shocking that the minister has taken that position, and therefore I think it further gives legitimacy to why possibly the member for Ruka Maloney, the Minister of Public, well now she's the Minister of Housing, Minister of Housing has been put to chair this committee, because it reflects the incompetence of Minister Marvin Gonzalez. Minister Marvin Gonzalez's responsibility is to share with the cabinet and to keep the cabinet in the loop in terms of what is happening with the state enterprises under him. The cabinet, as I've indicated, they are the ones who appoint political appointees to the board in majority of TSTT, and therefore it is shocking, it is strange for any member of the cabinet to say this morning or to tell the press that they are unaware that TSTT is selling off these assets.
With regards to the blackout, the report didn't give any clear indication of what is going to be done to prevent this in the future. So is the opposition concerned that we may see a repeat of what happened with regards to the blackout?
There are several recommendations that are contained in the report. Under Standing Order 24.4, I am only allowed to ask one question. And sometimes I think members of the public do not understand parliamentary process and procedure, and therefore several media houses were asking why didn't I follow up with the minister after asking the first question. But under Standing Order 24.4, your question is pursuant to that standing order that governs the House of Representatives, and that standing order provides only for one question. The question that I asked the minister was whether or not any of the recommendations, including cutting of the trees, simple as cutting of the trees, are already in train, and what is government's intentions in terms of implementing the recommendations of the report. The minister, like a deer in headlights, gave a very incoherent response, a very short but incoherent response, but we are deeply concerned. You are now seeing in Trinidad and Tobago where the Ministry of National Security is telling you look out for cyber security attacks. We saw recently what happened with Massey stores. part of cybersecurity attacks has to do with the electricity grid. And those are attacks that can come. We have seen those attacks happen in nearby Venezuela, where politicians themselves have used these mechanisms to control their population. So we are very, very wary of that. It is a matter that we will be raising in the Parliament, possibly through a private member's motion. It will be discussed in our caucus and so on, in terms of how we can get a clear and concrete answer and a way forward in terms of implementing. Because on many occasions, and Anita said it earlier, on many occasions we have commissions of inquiries. You have committees, and Mrs. Prasad Bisesa on our Monday night platform read out over 50 committees that this government has established since coming into office. What has come out of these committees? What have come out of these reports? I actually saw the last line of the Express editorial yesterday. The last line said, we would hope that the government does not allow the report to sit and just collect dust. Unless you have the political will, and Anita said it with respect to the education sector and the challenges we are facing there and the Children's Authority. There is no sense of urgency in terms of dealing with critical matters in this country. This is not just a public utilities matter. It is a national security matter. When you have a report that is an indictment on a government that says no one was in charge for 20 hours when there was a nationwide blackout, no report without enforcement is going to be to the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So thousands of, not millions of dollars was probably spent on this report, and just as the Express said, it may sit and collect dust, and we just move on to the next issue until a reoccurrence happens here. So yes, we are very concerned about that. Those are some of the questions that we were able to take. We thank members of the media and the national community for joining us this morning. I know that MP Haynes has something very special to share with us, and I now pass you over to MP Haynes.
Thank you, MP Padarath. Yesterday, on April 30th, the United National Congress celebrated 33 years of service to Trinidad and Tobago. So I'd like to take this opportunity at our press conference to thank the hundreds of thousands of UNC members, UNC supporters, those who are in Trinidad and outside of Trinidad, because I know we have a very vibrant group of persons who exist outside of our Trinidad and Tobago borders. But as we celebrate our 33 years of service, we acknowledge the work of our activists, our foot soldiers, and that includes members of parliament. We thank our political leader for her service and what she has done to build our party to the space that it is right now. And so as we celebrate our 33 years and as we look forward to more years of service to Trinidad and Tobago, we want to again reiterate our commitment to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to our commitment to good governance, to inclusive governance, and our commitment to restoring a beautiful Trinidad and Tobago. So happy 33 years to the United National Congress.
Anita, allow me to join you in expressing congratulations and best wishes to all our activists and supporters, but also add that Trinidad and Tobago has had the benefit of two of the best prime ministers this country has ever had, in the persons of Mr. Bastio Pandey, our first political leader and founder of our great party, and then taking the mantle from Mr. Pandey and really revolutionizing this country, especially in the sphere of education and infrastructure for those who live in rural communities. Many of our constituencies are rural communities, and while Port of Spain and Diego Marte developed, Mrs. Prasad Bisesa and her team ensured that all of Trinidad and Tobago develop side by side as one people going forward. So this morning I want to join in congratulating and expressing best wishes and thanking our founder, Mr. Bastio Pandey, and our current political leader, Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa, for providing great leadership to this country. I don't think that this country has ever seen the likes of those two persons who would have continue to be an inspiration to many of us younger ones who are in the politics today. But not only talking the talk, but walking the walk. We have had many years of PNM administrations in this country, but I'm sure all of Trinidad and Tobago would agree with me that the United National Congress has always been a doer. And we always say performance beats all talk any and every time. So this morning, as we leave you, I also want to express on behalf of the Leader of the Opposition, Mrs. Kamala Prasad-Bissessar, my colleagues both in the lower and the upper house, our national executive, all our supporters. I see our PRs here this morning always lending us that support. We thank him, Dr. Megu. But this morning we want to share with the Islamic community as they embark on the final day, which may very possibly be the final day of the holy month of Ramadan. Today, we want to wish them early Eid Mubarak, and may Almighty Allah continue to bless and keep them and their wonderful families, and bless all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So Eid Mubarak to our Muslim brothers and sisters. I know and I'm hoping that MP Saddam Hussein will provide us with some sawine soon. So MP, this is a shout out to you in particular and all our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago who are celebrating the holy month and the occasion of Eid al-Fitr. We wish you Eid Mubarak from all of us here at the United National Congress. God bless and God continue to bless all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
PNM must go.